Deputy Boyd Barrett.
You won't be surprised to know I want to raise the housing element of the National Reform Programme. And one of the things that should now send alarm bells ringing is that the construction sector in this country is starting to contract. I mean, as inadequate as Housing for All as a plan is, and it is wholly inadequate and is not addressing the crisis, even that may not now be delivered, as we are starting to see a contraction in construction because of rising costs. So I wonder, Taoiseach, how we're going to respond to that. We have a policy response proposal, which is because we can't afford not to deliver to address the housing crisis and to build the houses, public and affordable, and others that we need. If costs are going to stop the private sector from building, as is now becoming evident, we need a state construction company, because we simply cannot not build the public and affordable housing. We cannot allow a contraction in construction activity, and the state is going to have to step in where the market is not capable of deliver. What do you say?
First of all, in terms of housing more generally, I've said consistently it is the most pressing and most significant social issue facing our country. I've said that since I was elected as Taoiseach, and that's why we developed a very, very comprehensive plan for housing, which no other party opposite in the opposition have really responded to in any detail beyond sound bites and slogans, and some proposals that would make the situation worse. Your proposals would reduce supply in the market, simple as. Through the chair. Now, what I would say is this, that the government, right now, we have the highest level of commencements on record. We have the highest levels of planning permissions in over a decade. We have the highest levels of completions in over a decade. We've established a very high-level housing delivery group. We've been unfortunate the last 2 years, hit by COVID first with 2 lockdowns, and then hit now by a war on the Ukraine, which is affecting commodity prices. Price of steel, timber, has caused inflation. And house construction has gone slightly down, and that may be in Paribas report, but the predominant decline was actually in other sectors, not in the housing. And we've increased the capacity of the industry in terms of skills and so on, with a 40% increase in the construction apprenticeships. We've expanded Help to Buy scheme. We set up the new First Home Share Equity scheme. Over 1,000 people have already applied. All of you guys attacked that, yet the people are voting with their feet in terms of applying to these schemes because they find them useful. We've introduced a new 30,000 grant for vacant properties. We've introduced a new subsidy to activate apartment building in city centres for owner occupiers. We've expanded tenant purchase scheme to include pensioners. We're building the first affordable homes in over a generation through the local authorities. We've passed the first ever Affordable Housing Act. We've revamped the Land Development Agency to focus on affordable homes and put it on a statutory basis. We've put in place the first ever cost rental units in the history of the state. We've banned co-living, we've capped rent increases and strengthened tenants' protections. We've enhanced local authority home loan, reduced interest rates and making it easier for single people to get state-backed mortgages. And we've launched the largest state-led social housing building programme ever. We've slashed red tape with a new single-stage development approval process for LAs of up to 6 million to accelerate social housing delivery. We've expanded repair and release and lease from 40,000 to 60,000 to bring vacant properties into use. We've brought over 6,000 void homes back into use. We've delivered over 700 housing first tenants. We've launched a new housing strategy for disabled people, 2022 to 27, provided 81 million in funding for the housing adaptation grants for older people. We've established the National Homeless Action Committee. We've secured a local government rates waiver of over £1 billion to support local businesses and services. We've launched £1.3 billion in urban regeneration funding for towns and city centres, which will help infrastructurally for house construction. A £50 million water investment scheme for rural towns and villages. A £61 million fire services capital programme, and so on. So there's been a lot of action and work. Now, objectively, no matter what your views, you cannot dismiss the level of activity in the last 2 years. And notwithstanding the COVID situation and the war, we're going to do everything we possibly can. The other point I would make is that in 2021, there was about 20,400 houses built in this country. 12,600 of those were households, okay, bought by households in the private sector. 5,200 were social housing. So between the social houses and households generally, you're looking at about 87%. 2,600 were others. Sometimes when you look at the debate in this House, one would imagine that the 87% was the others, the 2,600, and not the fact that the vast bulk of houses built last year went to private households or to social housing. And there's been a lack of balance in the narrative around housing and in the debate to suggest it's all investment funds and all of that. It's not. It's not at all. And the same as this year. But it suits politically. And it suits the soundbite sort of environment that we live in contemporary politics to create that narrative and create that story that housing policy is reduced to looking after vulture funds and so on, as Deputy Boyd Barrett and Deputy Murphy will hammer every day. Whereas in fact, 87% of all housing completed last year was a combination of private households and social households in the country. It's a fact. And we're looking at a similar situation in 2022. So we do need balance and objectivity in the debate that I don't think we're getting. In respect of the issue in education, there's no doubt rents are too high. We need more and more supply across the board. By the way, the state is now the biggest actor in housing supply. No question about that, Deputy Boyd Barrett or Deputy Murphy. The state is the biggest actor. You can not all you like, social housing, affordable housing through local authorities, cost rentals, involvement in terms of the first home scheme. The state is the biggest actor in housing. Not funds, not anybody else. The government, the state, right? And then, so therefore, in terms of education, it's not just doesn't apply to education. It applies to anybody living and working in Dublin or in the major cities, in respect of any profession. So you can't just single out one. And there's no doubting that there are challenges, and people will opt for a cheaper situation, a lower rent situation if they can get it, that would meet their personal requirements. And until we get supply to a really significant level, I think we will continue to be in difficulty here. Now, we will look at other measures to alleviate the pressures that people are under through tax. Pay in the private sector went up 10% over the last 2 years. Okay, there was a public service pay deal that the Minister for Public Sector did negotiate last year, building momentum. There was a further negotiation commenced, which adjourned, and it is the government's desire that we would have a pay deal with the public service, but also then in the context of the budget that we would have proposals around tax, social protection, and also around that would be parallel with a pay agreement. And that overall then we can help to alleviate the pressures on teachers and on people working in the public service and in the private sector also through tax measures. Parallel with that then that we'd have a cost of living package and that we would focus on families and children and reduce the burden on children and on families. So that what the government envisages doing now is an overall cost of living package that would be once off, that would be applied in this calendar year, before the end of the year, that people would have funding from that package. And then that there would be the budget measures themselves, which would enable us to come through the winter and put in place more medium-term policies around childcare, spending in education and in all the various government departments.
Thank you very much.